Hello, dear listeners. Before we kick off today's story, please share your location in the comments section and remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'm William Jones. Just a year ago, if you had asked me to paint a picture of my life, I would have described myself as a content married man to Brenda, my love of over 17 years. I was also delighted to be a father to two daughters, Melissa, aged 16, and Kendra, aged 15. At that time, I felt that I had created a fulfilling life for myself and my family. Being a devoted husband and father meant the world to me. However, at present, it's challenging for me to even use the term content when thinking about my daughters. The notion of a happy marriage now seems like a distant memory. My life feels like a mere shadow of its former self. The reality is that I am no longer married, and my previous pride in my daughters has evolved into emotions that are difficult to articulate. Throughout my career as a chief engineer at a tool manufacturing plant, I have dedicated myself diligently to my work. It may not be glamorous, but it has been rewarding in its own way. But it's honest and it's steady. I've spent countless years pouring myself into my job, taking on extra shifts, solving problems, and doing whatever it took to climb the ladder. Not for myself. I never cared about fancy cars or extravagant vacations, but for them, for my family. Everything I did with Brenda and the girls in mind. I wanted them to have a house they could be proud of, a safe and comfortable space to call home. I wanted them to have opportunities one never had growing up. I worked tirelessly to provide them with all the comforts my salary could afford, sometimes even more than that, if I had to stretch things a bit. You see, my parents had a tough life. My father, a proud and hardworking man, lost everything during the 1998 recession. I was just a boy back then, but I remember the look on his face when it all came crashing down. The weight of failure he felt. Even though it wasn't his fault, my mother, God bless her, stood by his side like the loving and honest house. She was a devoted wife who never complained or blamed others. Instead, she did everything in her power to support our family during tough times. I remember a time when my father had to sell our car just to make ends meet, and I can still see him walking 2 miles to his office each day, carrying his briefcase with shoulders lumped in exhaustion but a steadfast determination in his eyes. When he wasn't feeling well, he would take the bus, even though it felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. Witnessing their daily struggles taught me the value of sacrifice and resilience. I'd often missed out on social activities with friends because I knew my parents couldn't afford to give me pocket money, but I never blamed them. They were doing their best in difficult circumstances. As a teenager, this experience deeply impacted me, and I made a promise to myself that if I ever had children, they wouldn't have to endure the same financial hardships. I vowed to provide them with a life where money wasn't a constant burden, not a source of worry. That's why I started working when I was just 16. While most kids my age were hanging out at the mall or playing video games, I was working at a local garage. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to cover what I needed and take a little pressure off my parents. I juggled that job with school and later with college, managing to secure a full scholarship that paid for my education. I was determined to be something more, to break the cycle of struggle that had defined so much of my parents' lives. My parents didn't live to see the full fruits of their sacrifices. They both passed away a year after I graduated college, but I'll never forget the look on their faces the day I landed my first real job. My father, who'd worked so hard and lost so much, looked at me with a pride I'd never seen before. And my mom, she was beaming, tears in her eyes. I'll never forget the day I bought her a car with my own salary. It wasn't new, far from it, but it was clean, reliable, and I'd remember the day I handed her the keys, the best I could afford at the time. I watched as she traced the dashboard with her hands, as though she couldn't believe it was real. The tears in her eyes weren't just tears of joy. They symbolized something deeper, a sign that my life was finally on track after all the struggle and sacrifice. After my mother's passing, I inherited the small house and car. It wasn't much, but it was ours, holding all the memories of my parents. It must have been what God intended. Life has a way of moving forward, even amidst heartache. It was during this time that I met Brenda. She was intelligent, beautiful, and full of life. We quickly hit it off and started dating, eventually getting married. It felt like a fresh start, an opportunity to build the life I had always envisioned, one filled with love and stability. Soon after, our two daughters, Melissa and Kendra, came into our lives. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. I continued to worked hard to support my family, ensuring that we had enough money to get by. I instilled in my daughters the importance of appreciating what they had and distinguishing between necessities and luxuries. However, my perspective was challenged one day when I found Melissa with a new iPhone. I was taken aback, questioning where she got it. Nonchalantly, Melissa mentioned that her mother had bought it for her. Surprised, I turned to Brenda for confirmation, only to receive a nonchalant response. I expressed my concerns about the financial strain of such a purchase compared to the Android phone I had provided the year before, more significant than the car I used to drive in college. Why did you purchase something like that for her without discussing it with me first? Brenda shrugged and closed the magazine before nonchalantly tossing it onto the coffee table. I synced up for it, she explained. I had enough and decided to get it for her. She's a teenager, William. All her friends have iPhones. Feeling a surge of frustration, I tried to maintain a calm demeanor. Brenda, the issue isn't whether you had the money or what her friends have. It's about teaching the kids the difference between necessity and luxury. An iPhone is a luxury, not a necessity. She needs to grasp that concept. Brenda sighed and reclined back on the couch. You're overreacting, William. It's just a phone. It's not the end of the world. Ready to continue the discussion, I hesitated as Brenda's dismissive attitude and return to the magazine indicated that further argument would be futile. Understanding that Brenda had already made her decision and that further debate was fruitless, I took a deep breath, shook my head, and silently walked away. The frustration lingered within me, stubbornly refusing to dissipate. It seemed to me that this situation was about much more than just a phone. It was about the core values I was striving to impart to my daughters. Despite my concerns, Brenda dismissed them, causing the conversation to come to an abrupt end. Several days later, I was taken aback to discover Kendra holding a phone similar to the one that had caused such tension with Melissa. I was stunned, my heart sinking at the sight. I immediately approached Kendra and inquired about the phone's origin. She mirrored her sister's nonchalant demeanor as she replied, Mom got it for me, conveying a sense of indifference. Choosing not to engage in a dispute with my daughter, especially over something that was not her fault, I refrained from responding. Instead, I sought out Brenda. Trying to maintain a composed demeanor, I uttered, Brenda, did you purchase an iPhone for Kendra as well? Her response was unwavering. The following morning, I tried to push aside our argument and focus on work as I headed to the plant, unaware that the day would bring a life-altering event. A meeting was convened with upper management, the kind that forebodes bad news. The somber plant manager stood before us, delivering a message that would change everything. The news was delivered that US was shutting down and all operations were being relocated to a new facility in China. I sat in shocked silence as the rationale was explained to me. The owners had determined that manufacturing tools in China and importing them back to the US would be a more cost-effective approach to boosting profits. However, what they failed to consider in their calculations were the human implications, the impact on the individuals who relied on this plant for their livelihoods. Despite my frustration, there was a small glimmer of hope. I wasn't facing immediate job loss as the chief engineer. I had a 6-month transition period ahead of me. My responsibility was overseeing the plant's dismantling and later assisting in the setup of 2 new facilities in China. While an opportunity was presented for me to work at the existing plant in China, I wasn't prepared to uproot my life for such a drastic relocation. Nonetheless, it was made clear that if I couldn't make the move to China, I should begin exploring new job opportunities after the new plant in China was operational that evening. As I arrived home after a run, fatigue apparent in my slow steps and burdened thoughts, Brenda took notice. There was a rare softness in her voice when she inquired, William, what's on your mind today? With no strength left to evade the question, I poured out all my work-related concerns, the impending plant closure, the short timeline, the unexpected opportunity to relocate to China. Brenda listened attentively, her demeanor expressing a deep understanding of the situation. Quietly, she then posed a question that caught me off guard. "Would you ever consider moving to China?" I was taken aback by the thought, as I had not yet entertained it. Uncertain, I confessed, I don't know. Starting anew in a foreign land where I don't speak the language does not seem like the right choice for me. Although she did not say much afterwards, her eyes held a silent plea for me to consider the option. Despite her subtle encouragement, Brenda did not press the matter further, simply nodding in acknowledgement, went back to her previous task. And in the following 3 months, I threw myself into work. The process of dismantling the plant was incredibly laborious, both physically and mentally. Each day was a struggle as I coordinated with teams, supervised the disassembly of machines I had used for years, and tried to avoid dwelling too much on the inevitable closure. At home, things felt unsettled. I was so engrossed in my work that I didn't initially notice it. However, one evening when I entered the living room, I saw Brenda casually scrolling through a new iPhone on the couch. I was stunned. Seeing that phone triggered alarm bells in my mind. I could tolerate her purchasing one for Melissa and then Kendra, despite my dislike for the idea. But for her to have one as well, it was clear that she couldn't justify it as saving money. 3 iPhones in just a few months on my income. Then it hit me. The funds weren't coming from within our household. They couldn't be. They must be originating from somewhere else, or worse, someone else. In my thoughts raced through dark scenarios as I contemplated Brenda's possible involvement in illegal activities. Rumors of housewives entertaining men for money crossed my mind, along with suspicions of Brenda borrowing money from questionable sources. What about Melissa and Kendra? Were they somehow implicated in this too? My mind was overrun by paranoid thoughts, each more distressing than the last, until my sense of logic became unrecognizable. Something felt amiss, pushing me to uncover the truth. Before long, my suspicions began to unravel. A few days after spotting Brenda with the mysterious iPhone, I fell ill with a fever. The physical and mental strain of work, concerns about the plant, and my swirling doubts had finally taken their toll. Bedridden, I stared at the ceiling, trying to reassure myself that everything would somehow fall into place. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint murmurs of distant voices emerging from the kitchen. I accidentally overheard their conversation as their voices carried easily through the thin walls. Brenda's voice held a light and almost excited tone as she mentioned receiving a new earring. Kendra and Melissa responded, with the latter sounding like an entitled teenager desiring a similar gift. However, my stomach churned upon hearing a question that struck me to the core. When would I leave my current situation and move in with Mr. Parker? Kendra's words dripped with a casual cruelty that shocked me to my core. The comment about preferring Mr. Parker's bigger house over our own hit me like a ton of bricks, draining all color from my face. The words reverberated in my mind, leaving me frozen in disbelief. My daughter of my own flesh and blood had just labeled me a bum and dismissed the home I had worked tirelessly to provide for our family as a dump. The weight of those words was suffocating, making me feel powerless and unable to comprehend the crumbling of my world. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I knew deep down that I was a man of strong principles. I refused to be taken advantage of by anyone in my family. Upon discovering their betrayal, instead of succumbing to despair, I found newfound clarity. Determined not to be mistreated any longer, I mustered all my strength to rise from bed, despite my weakened state and lingering fever. As I entered the kitchen, the tension was palpable, and my family fell silent at my presence. Although Brenda attempted to greet me as if nothing had happened, I remained composed. Taking a seat at the table, I fixed my gaze upon them, realizing they were not who I thought them to be. Despite their discomfort, I stood my ground, calmly but firmly addressing Brenda with the words, "Yes, Brenda, the leader of the house is up." Her smile wavered, a flicker of realization crossing her face. As I noticed the flicker of panic in Brenda's eyes, I made my intentions clear. "Pack your bags and leave this house immediately," I instructed. "I will be initiating divorce proceedings, and you can provide me with Mr. Parker's address for the paperwork." Brenda began to speak, But I silenced her by continuing. My gaze shifted towards Kendra and Melissa, who were seated in stunned silence. Since I anticipate losing custody of these two troublemakers in court, you may as well take them with you, I stated. This declaration spurred Kendra to stand up with a sneer on her face. Who would want to stay with a loser like you, anyway? She scoffed. Melissa echoed her sister's sentiments, touting Mr. Parker's wealth and belittling my values. Their cruel words no longer affected me. I felt detached. Standing up slowly, I addressed Brenda one final time. I steadied, as I informed Mr. Parker that given his wealth, he could choose to have me as his wife or in any other capacity he preferred, while also legally adopting my two daughters. I expressed my intention to relinquish my parental rights to him, ensuring that I would no longer have any responsibilities towards the children. The room fell silent as I awaited a response, already prepared for whatever came next. Brenda's expression crumbled, tears welling in her eyes as she moved closer to me, seemingly showing a belated sense of care. William, please, she pleaded, her voice shaking. I love you. I don't want a divorce. Let's talk about this. We can work it out. I gazed at her, unswayed by her words, sensing their emptiness. Where was this love during her deceitful actions and when our daughters disrespected me? He had given them everything he could have. But as I took a step back, creating distance between us, I spoke in a cold tone. It doesn't matter now. Your love for me was lost the moment it was exchanged for an iPhone and a gold earring. Her tears flowed harder, but I continued, expressing my exhaustion of being taken advantage of and pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. Retrieving my wedding ring, a symbol of a union now tainted with deceit and falsehoods, I carefully removed it from my finger and placed it on the table. With intention, the cool metal made a soft clinking sound against the wood surface. Silently, I went to a toolbox in the corner and retrieved a hammer, while Brenda's sobs turned into stunned silence. Returning to the table, I lifted the ring and positioned it flat against the surface before bringing the hammer down on it with all my might. The sound reverberated through the room, sharp and resolute as the gold metal yielded under the force, transforming from a perfect circle to a distorted and broken relic. Holding the altered ring in my hand, I knew it was time for a definitive end. Looking up at the object for a moment, I then handed it to Brenda and said, "Here." My voice remained steady, but there was a touch of bitterness in my tone. Her tears ceased at that instant. She transformed from sadness to anger, her face contorting into a grimace. "So this is how you want to play," she spat, her words dripping with venom. "Fine. I'll see you in court. You'll regret this day for the rest of your life." With that, she stormed out of the kitchen, followed by Melissa and Kendra displaying a mix of disdain and smug satisfaction. They seemed to believe they had the upper hand. I let them go without a word. As they vanished upstairs to pack their belongings, the weight of their departure settled in the house. Strangely, though, I felt a sense of relief, a feeling I hadn't experienced in months. Later that evening, they left, slamming the door behind them. I stood by the window, watching as they loaded their bags driving away, presumably headed to Mr. Parker's house. Whoever that may be, Brenda proved true to her word. In court, she tore through me like a relentless storm, leaving destruction in her wake. I stood there feeling powerless as the judge divided my life into fragments, granting her almost everything. My 401k vanished. Every penny of my hard-earned savings erased. The joint account now in her possession. In addition, I was burdened with a towering alimony set to deplete me unless Brenda chose to marry her shiny new benefactor, and ongoing child support payments that would endure until both my daughters reached 18. The only things I retained were my house and my car. A hollow victory indeed. My once warm and lively home now felt desolate, devoid of laughter and love. As for my car, it was no more than a machine, a mere tool for transportation. None of it felt like a triumph. Walking out of the courtroom, the weight of the world bearing down on me, I caught sight of him for the first time. Richard standing there arm in arm with Brenda, Kendra, and Alyssa was Mr. Parker, the man who had ingratiated himself into my family circle. They embraced each other in a tight family hug, a moment that I had strived so tirelessly to create over the years, but now it existed without me. Did it sting? Undoubtedly. It felt like a sharp knife twisting in my chest, a painful reminder of what I had been excluded from. But would it crush me? Absolutely not. If anything, it served as a stark realization. I had shed myself of toxic individuals in my life. These were people who did not cherish loyalty, honesty, or love as I did. They viewed me as a mere stepping stone rather than a partner or a father. Some might question why I didn't fight harder for my daughters, why I didn't pursue custody, prolonging the legal battle until they were by my side. The truth is, by the age of 16, a child's mind is largely developed, and both Kendra and Melissa were approaching that stage. Even if I had contested fiercely, they would have chosen not to come with me. There, the D's had already been swayed by the allure of luxury and a more comfortable life, their loyalty already decided by the promises of money. Every step towards them felt heavier than the last as I made my way over. Turning to face me, Brenda was the first to speak with a cold and victorious tone. "I warned you, I will bring you down." Then Kendra added to the tension with venom in her words, "Just as I said before, Dad, you're a failure." Though her words felt like a stab to the heart, I refused to show any weakness. Turning to Melissa, I searched for any hint of compassion, but she remained silent, firmly on their side. Richard Parker, with his smug smile, remarked, "No hard feelings, pal. They deserve a better life." Life was overwhelming, unable to be managed. I stood there, reflecting on everything that led to this moment. Every spoken word rushed back to me, but I refused to let it defeat me. I forced a smile, lacking sincerity in my eyes, and calmly addressed him. "You're correct, my friend," I began. "So shall you be taking responsibility for these two by next week, or will my resources suffice?" Richard remained composed, replying, "I always keep my promises." He reached for an envelope in his jacket, indicating that the process had begun. Handing me the papers, I maintained a steady hand despite feeling emotionally shattered. Without hesitation, I signed my name, realizing there was no turning back. Returning the paperwork, Richard assured me, "I have a lawyer who will expedite the process, and you can use the copy to handle child support closure." He paused for a moment, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation for a moment. His grin widened as he announced, "I'll be marrying Brenda next week, and you're invited." I glanced at him, this arrogant man who had taken everything from me, and couldn't help but force a smile. "Well, congratulations," I replied, my voice thick with sarcasm. "I hope Brenda doesn't find a wealthier man than you this time." Brenda opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. It was clear in her eyes that she knew I was right. She had climbed to a higher branch before, and who's to say she wouldn't do it again? The painful truth couldn't be denied. Just as Parker had predicted, the child support and alimony were settled. Our financial ties were cut, and I felt like I had been erased from their lives entirely. 3 months later, everything was officially over. I chose not to attend the wedding. Why should I? It wasn't my place anymore. It wasn't my family. They had made their decisions, and so had I. I moved forward, knowing that my chapter with them had come to a close. Part of me acknowledged that I was releasing something I had once believed to be unbreakable. However, I soon realized that the toughest challenge can be walking away from those you love, especially when they have already turned their backs on you. You're probably wondering if I was ready to move forward, having lost my wife and daughters. I could have, but a desire for revenge stirred within me. I decided to investigate the man who had taken everything from me. To my surprise, Richard Parker, the one responsible for my losses, was a major shareholder in the company I worked for. Although I had heard of him, we had never crossed paths. His acquisition of a majority of the company's shares 8 months ago shed light on the subsequent negative changes, such as the plant closure and relocation to China. It became evident that his motives were not to improve the company's efficiency or profitability, but rather to play a strategic game. By purchasing shares at a high value, he orchestrated a series of moves for his personal gain. Overseas operations were a key consideration. The possibility of selling the company later at a higher profit hinged on maintaining the product quality. Unfortunately, it was discovered that the tools produced at the China plant not only lacked quality, but also broke down shortly after use. This situation posed a serious risk to the company's success, with lenders and creditors facing potential losses. This was not the first time Richard Parker had engaged in such practices. Previous instances with two other companies resulted in bankruptcy, leaving employees in a difficult situation while he profited. Despite being viewed as a small-time chief engineer, I was not naive. I recognized the pattern of his actions, taking out loans, acquiring the company, liquidating assets, and shifting funds to his advantage. It was a familiar strategy aimed at personal gain at the expense of others. He decided not to stay silent. I sent a brief email to banks and lenders using an anonymous email address, outlining the entire fraudulent scheme. It appeared that rather than investing in enhancing the product and reducing costs, the individual in question was channeling funds to his own companies, disguising them as vendors for the work being carried out. This allowed him to keep the profits for himself, while the lenders faced losses and the employees ended up without jobs. How did I come across this information, you ask? Well, I was involved in the process of disbanding the company, and during that time, I interacted with a vendor who was removing the machines. The company in question was Scrap Metal Private Limited, owned by Richard's brother, Alistair Parker. Alistair was purchasing the plant machines as scrap, even though they were in excellent condition. Later on, I found out that Scrap Metal Private Limited had sold these machines to one of our company's rivals at a 60% discount from the market rate. Mail didn't just stay there, though. It found its way to the local newspaper and, surprisingly, the mayor's office. Now, what politician in an election year would let go of a business scandal like this in their city? Not one. And what mayoral candidates wouldn't want to blame the sitting mayor for being part of this scheme? It was classic politics. The timing was perfect. They'd never let this slide without making some noise about it. It was all set up to create a firestorm. I knew it was risky, but it was also the best move I had. Richard Parker had taken everything from me, but now he was going to face the consequences. It took just a week before the IRS, FBI, Department of the Treasury, and Federal Trade Commission all became involved. The investigation into Richard Parker's shady dealings became a full-blown federal matter. And here's something I couldn't believe myself. As I said before, God works in mysterious ways. I was at the Crossers, just picking up some groceries, when I decided to try my luck with a scratch card for the first time ever. It may sound silly, but when I scratched it off, I was shocked to find out that I had won $800,000. After taxes, I would be left with $544,000, more than what I had lost in the divorce. The best part? It was all mine. It felt surreal. The burden of everything I had endured, the betrayal, the loss, the hardships, suddenly felt lighter. That money wasn't just a stroke of luck, it felt like a sign. A sign that life, in its mysterious ways, was finding a way to restore balance. Now, both Mr. Richard Parker and Mr. Alistair Parker were under investigation by the authorities. Their once charmed lives, along with Brenda's and the girls', were spiraling downwards. Despite constant calls from Brenda and the girls, I chose to ignore them. They had made their decisions, and now it was time for me to focus on myself. The work at the plant had come to a halt, but the investigation, with the mayor's involvement, ensured that everyone was being compensated during this period. I seized this opportunity to make the most of this new chapter in my life during a recent break. I took the opportunity to renovate some parts of my house. After a week of work and investing around $50,000, my house was transformed into a beautiful space, complete with a small heated pool in the backyard. Not only did my physical health improve, but my mood also lifted because of the changes. However, one day, Brenda unexpectedly showed up with her children. They were banging on the door, eager to come in. As Brenda rushed inside, demanding to know where the money came from, her daughters, Kendra and Alyssa, explored the renovated house. Kendra was shocked to find her room transformed into a home theater, while Melissa was amazed by the new pool in the backyard. When Brenda accused me of taking money from her, I stood my ground and questioned their intrusion into my home. As tensions rose, I looked at Brenda and emphasized, "You are married to 1. Brenda is the one involved. 2. Now you're here, asking another man for money. 3. You were smoking something unusual. 4. Her face flushed with anger as she glared at me. 5. Do you think you can escape consequences for everything? I'm aware of your actions, and I want my share of that fortune. 6. I stood with my arms crossed, feeling the regained sense of control from the past few months sinking in. 7. If you're seeking your portion, maybe inquire with your new husband, Richard. He likely has plenty of cash available for you. 8. Kendra rolled her eyes. This is just sad. Give her the money, Dad. 9. I turned to her, feeling irritation rising within me. Stop it, Kendra. Don't refer to me like that anymore. You've made your decision, and there are no second chances. Plus, legally, I'm not your father. 10. Melissa added sarcastically, yeah, why not hand over the money and let's all move forward, Dad? 11. Clenching my jaw, I brushed off their words, though they stung. I was not going to show how much they affected Meg. Get out. All of you get out. I don't need any of this from you. Out of here, or I will call 911. Brenda looked stunned for a moment. Then her face twisted in anger. This isn't over, William. You'll regret this, she exclaimed. I shot back, no, Brenda. You're the one who will regret it. You left me, remember? You chose money over everything else. Now you can go back to that. I dare you to take me to court. This time I will wreck you. I knew Brenda would file a case against me in court, but I was prepared. I had already gone through everything with my lawyer and knew this was coming. In the courtroom, Brenda sat there looking more entitled than ever. She claimed that I had not given her enough of my assets, and that I had hidden money from her. My lawyer was calm and methodical as he presented the details to the judge. He laid out everything, explaining my sudden wealth, how the money was earned, and that it was all legitimate. The judge, who had been flipping through the case files, finally looked up at Brenda and asked in a steady voice if she had any evidence that Mr. Jones had hidden any money from her. Brenda hesitated before stammering a response, well, no, but the judge promptly cut her off, stating, then I'm afraid there's nothing to substantiate your claim. Glancing at the papers in his hands, he continued, now about your request for alimony. Before he could finish his sentence, Melissa and Kendra abruptly stood up, simultaneously accusing, he abandoned us. Kendra pointed at Brenda, adding, you're a coward. Melissa, her eyes filled with anger, chimed in, yeah. The judge sighed, clearly exhausted by the outburst. Removing his glasses slowly, he peered over the top of them at the two girls. Holding a few papers in his hand, he then turned back to Brenda. In a firm voice, he declared, Mrs. Parker, you are currently married to Mr. Richard Parker. According to the records, I do not see any reason to grant you further money from Mr. Jones. Brenda's face twisted with disbelief as she opened her mouth to protest. But the judge remained composed as he addressed the courtroom, specifically directing his words towards Melissa and Kendra. Since Mr. Richard Parker has officially adopted you as his daughters and Mr. Jones has transferred all parental rights to him, he is no longer accountable for you, stated the judge. With that, the case for additional alimony was dismissed. I let out a deep sigh of relief as Brenda's demands were unequivocally denied by the judge's final decision. Despite Brenda's evident frustration, she was speechless, unable to articulate a response. Her face flushed with anger, but it was all in vain. The judge's ruling had sealed her fate. Although Brenda and the girls continued to reach out, their tone had shifted from demanding and entitled to one of desperation. Despite agreeing to one final meeting, I was determined to maintain control. I wanted the upper hand in this situation. That's when I decided to. The only place I would meet them was at my lawyer's office. I wasn't taking any chances with them, not anymore. They showed up dressed in their best clothes, trying to look like they still held some power. But I saw through it all. I sat across the table from them, placing my flagship Android phone on the table. The sleek black device gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the same phone I bought after my sudden windfall. Brenda's eyes immediately flicked to it. "You've changed, Bill," she said, almost in disbelief. I smiled, my gaze steady. "All thanks to you and Mr. Parker's daughters." Brenda's face hardened. "They're your daughters, Bill." I raised my hand slowly, then reached into the folder my lawyer had prepared for me. I pulled out a piece of paper and slid it across the table toward her. "As per this paper," I said, "they are not my daughters." Brenda looked down at the paper, her expression faltering. What is this?" I watched her face as it went from confusion to realization. She gazed at the signature on the document that solidified everything. Her husband's name scrawled across the paper. "It has your husband's signature on it," I stated coolly. Tears welled up in her eyes, her voice quivering. "Does this piece of paper make him their father?" she asked, struggling to keep her composure. I reclined in my chair, arms crossed. I had become numb to any emotions for her or her children. The anger I once felt had dissipated, leaving behind only stark reality. "Yes," I responded evenly. "It does. That's what you taught me. You're the one who chose to have an affair with that man for money. You became another man's wife for the sake of material wealth. My daughters label me a failure because I had less money on paper. They scorned our humble home as a place worth only as much as the money it was made of. So yes, when it comes to you and your daughters, it's all about paperwork." Both Kendra and Alyssa started to cry, their voices trembling as they apologized. "I'm sorry, Dad." I remained unmoved. The familiar emotions of guilt and yearning for the family we once were lingered in the air. The memories of his presence were long gone. Now all I experienced was a hollow emptiness. "Shut up," I snapped, the tone of my voice cutting and firm. "And if you dare call me Dad again, I'll bring this meeting to an abrupt end. Richard Parker is the one you should look to as a father, not me." Their voices fell quiet, the sobbing fading into strained breaths. Their tears and apologies fell short. I had no more to offer them, no reserves left to give. Eventually, Brenda found her voice. It trembled yet held a fragile composure, as if clinging to the remnants of her pride. "We're getting a divorce. He wants to cut me off," she revealed, her gaze pleading with me. "We had a prenup, and soon I'll be out on the streets with my daughters. Are you satisfied now?" I met her gaze, the buried anger resurfacing, colder and fiercer this time. "No, Brenda," I replied sharply. "He's not trying to discard you. It was you who sought to discard him. Now that it's his turn to assess, jail time is in your future, knowing you won't receive any financial gain from me. You are planning to discard me and return to my side solely for my money. Your actions repulse me, Bill. I have been your wife for years, and those are your daughters too. If we end up on the streets, how will you cope with that?" she inquired softly. "But I am no longer your wife, nor are they your daughters, and their issues are not my concern. If you desire money, find a job. If you seek employment, search for it yourself. Do not come seeking aid from me, for I am no longer your doormat." I stood my ground. "If you ever come close to my home or me, I will not hesitate to obtain a restraining order and have you incarcerated," I stated coldly, staring directly into their eyes. Brenda and the girls attempted to display distress, begging and crying, but their actions failed to move me. I remained unmoved. They have made their choices, and now they must face the consequences. I turned away from them without another word. Regarding Richard Parker and his brother, the Parkers received the consequences they deserved. The investigation rightfully exposed their wealth downfall. They ended up in jail, losing their wealth. Though I'm sure they had a ton stashed away in offshore accounts, they were never going to enjoy it. Given the length of their possible sentences, they wouldn't be able to touch that money during this lifetime. They had no family, no children to pass it on to, so in the end it was all just waste. But they weren't completely stupid. In a surprising twist, the Parker brothers made the most intelligent move they could. They struck a plea deal with the government. The government would get the money, and in exchange, the Parkers would be out in just a few years. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction at the thought. Justice in its own way. As I said earlier, God has his own ways of doing things. The Parker brothers, after everything, got their own kind of justice. While they were in jail, a group of men who had once worked at one of the plants Richard and Alistair had shut down, found them. These were the same men who had, after losing their jobs due to factory closures, they were left to rebuild their shattered lives. Seeking justice, they ensured that the Parker brothers faced consequences that no courtroom could achieve. As for me, I've come to terms with the idea that marriage is not in my future. I've experienced enough challenges to realize I don't need that level of complexity in my life. I find contentment in my quiet existence, which is not devoid of fulfillment. While the house used to feel empty, now I share it with 2 German shepherds who bring unexpected warmth. I've distanced myself from Brenda, and I am indifferent to any contact from her. My former stepdaughters are now independently working at a local cafe, carving out their own paths. I hold no ill will toward them or myself. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Please provide your feedback in the comments section. And remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.